Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. This is a conversation I had with May Moninghoff, a neuroscience student I met at the Vision Sciences Society annual conference at St. Pete's Beach, Florida. May got a bachelor's in cognitive science and computer science at UC Davis and works in Chris Baker's Brain and Cognition Lab in the National Institute of Mental Health. May is trans, poly, and has synesthesia, so I would say she's a very fluid person. I was presenting a poster at the conference, and May and her friends stopped by, and we started a conversation, and we exchanged some good vibes almost immediately. So eventually, May and I sat on the beach and had some recorded conversations. At night, we watched a blood moon eclipse from the beach, and I lost my sky blue hydro flask there. In this first part, May talks about being trans, how it shaped her life, her evolving understanding of herself and others, and ways to create a bridge of empathy between the LGBTQ and other minorities and the rest of the population. So I want to start first with a bit of a biographical overview.
Okay.
Who are you, May? Where do you come from? What has been your brief? What was your parents' childhood upbringing, life story so far? Getting into science. What have you done so far? Just to get a kind of background of who you are.
Sure. Well, okay. So my name is May Moninghoff. I picked that first name. Yeah. It's my third name that I've chosen for myself. It turned out actually to be my great-grandmother's name, and I didn't know that until after I'd already chosen it, which was a very amusing story that basically involved I was trying to pick my name, and I was telling I was going by a name that wasn't my given name at this point, and I was telling my girlfriend at the time and my best friend, hey, I'm kind of thinking about going by this other name. It's May. I like it. And then I went home to visit my family, and they were the only ones that really knew about this, and I was kind of talking with my mom, and she mentions Grandma Akerd, who was my grandma, or her grandma. And she always has called her Grandma Akerd, but for some reason she said Grandma May. And I was like, what? Who?
On the same day that you were thinking about this?
This is 2 or 3 weeks prior. I had told my girlfriend and best friend that this was something I was considering. So it's just, I don't know, it's just very, as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, that's my name.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a synchronicity.
Yeah. And I had actually been named after her dad already. Yeah. So my given name was my grandfather's name, and now my chosen name is my great-grandmother's name, his mother. Yeah. So that was, I don't know, that feels very important to who I am now. Yeah. It also exposes the fact that I'm a trans person. I consider myself a non-binary trans person, so it's kind of hard to describe what that means. But I think for a while I thought I was a trans woman, and I'm on estrogen. I'm transitioning. I've been on estrogen for 4 years now. Actually, a week ago, Wednesday, this past Wednesday was my rebirth day. That marks 4 years of transition.
Was your what?
Rebirth day.
Rebirth day.
Yep.
The day of my rebirth. It's the day that marks. What exactly does it mark? When you say the day of your transition?
It's the first day I ever took hormones. It was when I started hormones.
Okay. Wow.
And so it was it was just a very marked moment of change and shift in my life where I became not that I became a new person, but I started a very new chapter in the person that I am, and. I don't know, it's one of those things that a lot of the impacts of transition can be measured in time, like the research and things like that. So you can expect these results in these time frames, because you basically go through another puberty. You go through second puberty. And if you've already gone through second puberty in your late 20s, early 30s, you go through third puberty when you start hormones. And so, it felt important to keep track of, and it was also exciting. And You know, we like to celebrate our
rebirth states.
yeah, well, I was getting at like our important moments, you know, like our life shifts, you know, like you celebrate an anniversary, you celebrate a birthday, you celebrate these things that mark the passage of time. So
yeah. So I have some more questions about, you know, being trans.
Sure.
Like some very basic questions. Like as you were growing up, what was it that was kind of like an early clue or something like that that made you feel like, hey, hang on a sec, in this particular way I'm not really like other people, and I feel like something. Could you like kind of give me like a, you know, being trans for dummies version for just
I'm
like
good
a
at that
real
one.
yeah.
I you know, I think it's something that I always kind of like knew implicitly, and I'm a very pragmatic person. Like I'm kind of realistic, and when something, you know, feels wrong in my life or like something bothers me, I think about whether I can change it or not. And if I can change it, I say, do I want to? And if I want to, I do something about it. And if I don't, I don't. And either way, I'm resolved. And if I can't change it, then, you know, the question becomes like, can I accept it? And if not, what does that mean? You know, and usually the answer is I will accept it, because if I can't change it, not that I don't want to change it, but if I can't change it, or I feel like I can't change it, then I'm like, there's no use letting it bother me. And so I think as a young person, I was aware that I wasn't aware that I was trans. Like I didn't understand the concept of trans, but I knew that I was a woman. I knew I knew it. I just knew it. Like
as
I felt
far
it.
back as your memory goes?
Oh yeah, I remember like being like 5 or 6 and thinking like I was raised Christian, and I'm still very spiritual, but I'm not. I don't practice organized religion.
Were you raised like very Christian or?
I wasn't like Catholic. No,
okay.
We were Protestant, and so that tends to be like the looser of Christianity overall. And we go to church regularly. My parents aren't like die hard, you know, like they believe in God. It's very important to them, but I think that we're this like, for me, what feels like a very special form of spirituality, where it's like it's about the kindness, it's about the love, it's about the hope, you know, and things like that. And it's rarely about the sin or the wrongness, unless the sin or the wrongness is being unkind, you know, like it's you are good to others, you share, you take care of people, you listen, you're humble, you know, like these were the kind of things that they really cared about. But so I remember as a really young person thinking, thank God heaven exists, because one day I'll die and then I'll get to have my real body in heaven. And I thought that at like 5.
Why did you think that? Because you're like, heaven is a place where like things are just, you know, like the ideal that you would like to have, and this world is kind of imperfect, and one of the clearest ways that this is imperfect for me is that I'm not exactly in the right body, so heaven should be like that.
That's
exactly. So interesting.
And to me, heaven was always like this mind palace kind of place where you could do whatever you wanted. Anything was valid, and you could have what you wanted, you could be who you wanted, you could be around who you wanted. Like it's almost like the world of your dreams. And
that seems a little too hedonistic for some people's imagination of heaven.
Maybe. And I mean, that gets into a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
about, like,
I know. I kind of
qualifies
wanted
as, like,
to reserve that for later. You mentioned that in your email about, hey man, like just do what you want to do as long as you're being kind. Well, we'll get to that later.
Yeah. But I mean, there is a place for hedonism to some degree. I think like when you struggle to value your own desires and wants, I think practicing hedonism can be something that's very powerful. But if you're the kind of person who puts themselves first to the expense of others, hedonism is a very slippery slope into a dangerous place, you know. So, and everything's kind of this double-edged coin. I think I will often reframe things in these alternating perspectives of like, here's the good, here's the bad. And so, you know, I think as a young trans person, I did that as well, where it like kind of felt like, okay, you know, when you're born, you get like, it's almost like an RPG, like you get this chance to allocate stats, and you don't actually get a choice of like how many points you start with or where they go. They're just like some other external factors, you know, like your ancestry and your culture decide those things for you, and your genetics, like, and some interplay of them, like they spend those points. But of course I didn't think of it so scientifically as a kid, but I was like, you know, I feel like I kind of got pretty lucky. Like I got a lot of points and I liked where they went mostly, except for in some few categories that were like very bad, you know, such as being trans, right? Where like I felt and it's almost like, you know, like you get something because something was costed. Like you incur a struggle or a hardship or a pain, and you get rewarded for it. Like other things benefit from that struggle, and that's obviously not always the case. Some people, like, some suffering is just senselessly violent. It's just suffering that no one benefits from, no one gains anything from, and it's just sad. But I tend to have a very silver linings perspective. It's what I have control over, my perspective. And I think that part of the reason that I have that silver linings perspective is, well, first of all, my mom has never had a bad day in her life. That's just the kind of person she is. Like,
wow.
Even her bad days, she's like always looking for a positive spin, and that's how she gets through her life. She's always trying to cultivate hope inside of herself. So that being said, I feel like that's a perspective I adopted really early on, and it's how I got through the experience of being dysphoric and feeling like I didn't fit. And when I was young, it didn't feel like a painful thing necessarily. It felt wrong, like something felt weird about it. But I think I feel more strongly gender euphoria than gender dysphoria.
What is gender euphoria?
It's kind of like the opposite of gender dysphoria. And dysphoria being like, oh, my body parts feel wrong, you know? So like the fact that I grow facial hair, or that I'm so tall, or that I have, whatever facial features I have, or whatever anatomy that I have feels wrong and bad. Versus gender euphoria, which is like the idea of having this other anatomy, or this other structure, or this other emotional experience feels very enticing. It feels very good.
Yeah.
It's, another one of those two sides of a coin kind of things where most trans people experience some mixture of the two. But I think
it reminds me a little bit about how you were describing your parents' kind of religion or spirituality, where it was like focused more on the kind of like the optimistic or the bright side, or the
absolutely
less about the not this and not this, and more about what
can you be? What do you want? You're right. That's very true. Absolutely. So I think that for me, it's always been about what am I walking towards versus what am I running away from.
So did you tell your parents about this
as a kid? No.
No.
I didn't know what a trans person was. And like I said, I was very pragmatic. Yeah. So I looked at my character sheet and I said, well, I don't think I can change that one, so I'm going to get over it. And I moved on.
But did you say anything about, hey, I don't feel okay in my body, or like, kids' terms or things like that?
I don't
feel
so.
like I'm a man, I'm a boy, nothing like that.
No, and that's the thing. It goes back to, like, I kind of feel like a non-binary person, where if I had been born AFAB, if I had been born female, AFAB is assigned female at birth, and AMAB is assigned male at birth. So they're acronyms that can be used, and I think some people don't like them. It's with trans people, like, everyone kind of has a different preference of what they describe. But I think for me, the experience of being a socialized male trans person and a socialized female trans person are notably different. So when discussing non-binary identities, I think I would never use these as ways to out people, but as a trans person discussing what it feels like to be trans, I think when I discuss my experience with non-binary AFAB people, it's notably different. We were treated by the world differently, and there's a way to describe that with, these terms. And so that's how I use them. And some people, not a huge fan of them, and I get that. I would not use them for someone who wasn't comfortable with them, and I wouldn't use them to out someone who didn't want to be outed. But as I discuss myself, I will use them. And so... oh gosh, why did I bring that up?
I think I was saying, did you ever talk about this with your parents? And you were like, no, I didn't know what the trans thing was.
Okay, yes, I get where I was headed. And where I was headed was that I think had I been born AFAB, if I had been born a woman in the first place, I still would have been non-binary.
Yeah.
Like, I would have not, I don't identify very strongly with the social role of women, but I do identify with the physiological experience of being a woman. And I think there's actually a lot of women who don't identify themselves as non-binary who resonate with that statement. I know lots of people who exist somewhere on the non-binary spectrum, but don't necessarily claim the identity label for themselves, but they just claim an expanded definition of womanhood.
Your thinking and articulation of this is very, like, kind of clarified and mature.
Yeah.
How did you get to this point?
I just like to think a lot. I don't know. I like to convey myself to people a lot.
Yeah.
And you've kind of talked earlier, you recognized something in me in that, like, I almost pursue being different to some degree.
Yeah.
But I don't like feeling disconnected. Like, I was never antagonistically different. You know, I wanted to be different because I liked being unique and I liked having novel perspectives. And I like people so much. I really like people. And I think that, like, I just spend a lot of time, like, analyzing and trying to come up with ways to convey things.
Yeah.
And my dad is very big into analogies. He likes to make these, like, subtle comparisons where he says, it's like this. And then you give someone an example that feels intuitive to them. And so I think I spent, I try to be humble, so but in the context of doing this podcast and, like, talking with you, I will make statements about myself that I think tend to be true. And I think that I tend to be a rather insightful person, someone who has the ability to see into people and what they're like and what they know and what they think and what they feel. And I try to use that to modify myself and code switch my behaviors and what I'm trying to say into a way that I think they'll understand based on what I know about their priors.
Yeah. But my question was not just about you explaining things clearly to me, but also being able to understand clearly for yourself what's going on. You just mentioned two different dimensions. One was physiologically, you feel more like a woman, but socially and culturally was something else.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, especially when their experience doesn't match up to what most people's experiences are, what most of human vocabulary and teaching and education is about, then they may end up just having like a weird, cloudy, muddy, ambiguous...
They don't know how to describe it.
There's no trans education in schools where you learn this concept like, wait, hang on a sec, there's like 3 dimensions to this. Where am I on each of these dimensions? So you had to figure it out for yourself?
Absolutely.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so you could... Yeah, trans women really love to discuss a lot of these things. So if you engage with trans politics and if you follow trans people, they will talk about these things a lot amongst themselves. And I tend to avoid discourse as a whole, but I would say that, like, I carry discourse inside of myself. Like, I spend a lot of time just, like, trying to take an objective viewpoint and trying to reframe my perspective. And every time I have a perspective, I think, how can I have a different perspective on this? How can I flip this around and see it from a drastically different perspective that is just as true? And so I think that kind of practice leads to, it's a mindful practice, you know, and it's a ego death kind of practice where you're willing to look at yourself and try to see yourself in a true light. And also, you know, I've spent a lot of time, I couldn't have said what I said to you just now 4 years ago. When I first came out, I didn't know those things, you know. I couldn't have said them the same way. But I've spent so much time explaining myself to others, explaining myself to myself, seeking understanding of myself, seeking understanding of others, seeking to be understood by others, that the words just kind of come now, you know. And I think there was a time when I identified as a trans woman and I swung very hard towards it, and it felt wrong, like it didn't feel quite right. So I swung back towards non-binary, but I never wanted to stop estrogen. I never wanted to stop transitioning because actually the problem for me was that I liked masculinity. Sometimes I like being perceived as a man. I like being perceived confusingly. I think if I was born a woman, I would have felt happier with my body, but less happy with my social role. You know, I think there's a lot that I learned being socialized male that I still like to employ, that still benefits me, that I still carry myself like a man in many ways. And that's not to say that all trans people do this, but I do. And so, you know, recognizing that I had this dissociation between what I felt like my body was and how I wanted to be treated was very useful. I wish people would perceive me as a woman first and then as a degendered being.
Yeah.
You know, I wish that sometimes people would treat me like they treat women without me having to explain to them that I'm one. And having this non-binary presentation doesn't get me there as easily as I'd like. You know, I think people first realize that they think I'm a man, and then they realize, wait, maybe you're non-binary. But actually what I want them to do is kind of like jump to the other side. You know, I need
as
them...
the default.
Yeah, like I need it's like, it's easier if you can see it, but I'm also imagining a line, and obviously gender is not linear, but if you're imagining a line where like man is on one side and woman is on the other, it's like I was born on the man side, and then I wanted to like jump over to the woman's side all the way to the opposite end so that I'm perceived first as a woman, and then I wanted to walk into the center, you know. And I think a lot of people are more likely to perceive that I'm on the left side, or I'm left being male for me, because that's how I'm referencing it. They perceive me as from the male side, having walked to the center. But actually, for me, it was more like I jumped over to the opposite end and then walked to the center. And that feels a lot more true to my identity and like the kind of person
really appreciate how you're like so straightforwardly and clearly explaining this to me. It feels like I'm walking with you in a landscape that's not just filled with landmines and trip switches about, oh my god, when are we
what are you gonna say?
When like, am I gonna like offend you or something? This is just like a very, hey guys, come on in here. I'm just gonna explain to you.
Let me show you.
On your left here is this and blah,
welcome
blah.
to my crib.
yeah.
Let's go.
So this is something that I mentioned before while we were not on a recorded conversation. But I was thinking about this, is I can't help like mentioning this again. I feel like you have this kind of like fearlessness in you, like you make yourself and your identity, and you're talking about it in a lot of, I mean, there's no like shame and hiding about it, like at least not as I see
that.
it. And there's this like kind of fearlessness, which I feel I'm like really appreciating, and I think
thank you.
It makes conversation and understanding a lot better.
I agree.
But this is something that I pointed out in the beginning. It's like my first thought when I saw this, I was like, this person must have been like kind of loved and affirmed.
I was gonna, if you didn't bring it back to that, I was gonna bring it back myself, because that is what you said.
Yeah, because a lot of the time I feel like the fucking big deal about being a gender minority or whatever is not as much about what particular kind of zoo creature am I, but about the fact that I have been made to feel not just
like
by society at large, but also the people who are supposed to be closest to me, and your own self in like a really kind of weird way.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that gives rise to a lot of those weird mental funks and complexities then.
Yeah, it totally does.
To sit and work out, you know.
I do feel really lucky. You know, I talked about my family, and it wasn't without its problems. There are ways that, like, it was hard to be trans, that, like, my family didn't understand. My family was raised in a generation that, like, didn't really understand mental illness and didn't really, like, they thought of it as something that meant, like, something had gone wrong. Like, they had done something wrong if I was mentally ill. And so I think for a long time I felt kind of afraid to talk about it, but...
We might have to get a little bit farther away from that. That's gonna mess stuff up.
You think so?
Yeah, I do think so.
Okay. All right. Well, let me finish this point real quick, and then we can travel away.
Yeah, I'm gonna... Is it okay if I just hold this up to your...
Yeah, here, I'll put it... I'll just lay it by me.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will actually be picking it up. We can pause after this and check it. But I think... I was very lucky to be raised by people who love me very implicitly. And I think that gave me a lot of this, like, unshakable, firm foundation to build myself on top of, where it doesn't feel like people can take it from me.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, no, and I actually like being trans.
Yeah,
you do?
Yeah, I know that feeling in certain contexts where I see people struggling with an externalized insecurity.
Yeah.
And then I've kind of struggled to explain it to them. I'm like, you know, there are times when I have realized all of this is trumped by the fact that I know that I love myself.
Yeah.
And that I'm worth it.
Yeah.
And then these externalized things, this person said this or that person thinks this thing about me.
Away.
It's just like it doesn't matter. You know, it might matter to them. It doesn't matter to me.
No, it's so true. You feel like safe inside of yourself, and you protect yourself, and it's something that I wish I could give to people when they don't have it. I'm so thankful, and I try to help people find that security in themselves. It's why I like to talk about this sort of thing. Yeah. Because it doesn't hurt me, and nothing that I say can be used against me, because I know me.
Yeah.
And no one can. It doesn't matter what people think about me. It doesn't matter if people use the right pronouns or if they treat me the way I want to be treated or not, because actually it's their loss if they don't get it. You know, if they don't see me as I am, they're missing a wonderful facet of me, and that doesn't hurt me.
Yeah,
that doesn't take anything away from me. It's only their loss, you know. And so, I don't know. I just let them live their lives, and I do mine. And
we were really kind of we were talking about this sense of safety and love that you
that
feel
one
in like
experience
in being yourself. And I think related to this is something that we talked about before, is bringing empathy into the conversation or bridge building between like LGBT people and muggles.
Those blessed with our presence.
Did you just come up with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were kind of talking about this before, is that I feel a lot of people don't want to touch these issues with a 10-yard pole,
right,
because they're like...
They're afraid of the backlash.
Yeah, they're going to be like, hey, you are a something-ist.
Yeah.
And you go to hell, and we're going to shame you on the internet, and we're going to tell everyone about how you are, misogynist. It feels like just everywhere is just like trip switches. You don't know.
Well, fortunately, I'm trans, so I have a trump card, and I can say whatever I want.
Nice.
At least about transness. That's not true, but
yeah.
No, I get frustrated with discourse. I think there's a lot of value in discussing these things.
Yeah.
But actually, a lot of the discussion that happens does not have value. It is not that it doesn't have value, but the point of the discussion is actually not to make things better. It's just to let out your feelings. And sometimes that's nice. Sometimes it's necessary. People are mad and frustrated and hurt for a lot of really good reasons. But I think if you want to make positive change, if you want to make progress, I think black movements, I think, really understand this, in that, like, if you want to make progress, you actually have to put your ego away a little bit. You have to be willing to deliver your message in a way that the other people can't just chuck it out.
Yeah.
And I think when you get mad, when you get upset, when you start lashing back out, it gives them ammo to disregard your position.
Yeah.
And it also,
it affords them the ability to ignore the bigger point of what you're making by pointing out the smaller point of, did you see how the tone or the thing that he said?
Yes, you're rude. You didn't. And it shouldn't be the responsibility of an oppressed population to deliver their message in a way that feels good to hear.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's just more likely to be heard. I mean, and not even unfortunately, because when we're not talking about transness or blackness or what have you, whatever these intersections are, let's say you and I just get in a disagreement, right?
Yeah.
Like, you and I are just mad at each other. If I come to you hot and pissed off, we're gonna wrestle it out, and maybe that needs to happen a little bit. Mm-hmm. But if I came to you and I said, hey Neil, I know that you're upset. I know that something that I did hurt you, but something that you did also hurt me, and I want to talk about that. I want to connect about that. I want to apologize for the ways that we misunderstood one another. I think you're going to get a lot farther. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. I feel more successful when I'm willing to put my ego aside and apologize. Even if it's for something small, even if I was the one that got hurt first. Yeah. If I want to be heard, usually what happens is, like, say, going back to this example of you and I getting in a fight, you say something that bothers me, that gets under my skin, but I don't react right away, and then later on I lash out a little bit in response, and now you feel hurt, but you don't know that I was responding to your original thing, so you feel hurt now, and technically I got hurt first, so I was justified, but, like, who cares? Why does that matter? Yeah. Because right now both of us are hurt, and if you come to me and you say, well, May, what you did really upset me, and I say, well, you hurt me first, so I don't care that I hurt you. We're not going to get anywhere, and oh man, but you're so justified in feeling upset and frustrated, and the fact that you hurt me first doesn't invalidate your frustration, so anyways, I don't know if that analogy comes across perfectly, but it's just this idea of, like, I feel very willing to set myself aside and apologize, even for something small. Like, if I think I was right first, I'll come in and I'll say, hey, I've got this problem. I want to apologize because I think there are these, like, ways that I haven't carried myself properly. And it's this concept called a slight concession. And if you're willing to make a slight concession, the other person is also often willing to make a slight concession, and then those concessions can compound to where you're actually hearing each other again. But if neither of you is willing to budge at all, then you're not going to make any progress. Someone has to budge first. And I'm, again, going back to why I was okay with being trans, is like I can only really control me. I can influence others, and my actions have impact. But at the end of the day, I'm the only one who I can decide to do something different.
Yeah.
You know, and so when I'm frustrated, I try to do that because I can make it easier on everyone. And
do you usually find this kind of empathy like easy or easier than the next person?
I think so. Yeah,
and,
I think it comes really easy to me. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy in the sense that that's like a crazy big deal for me. Because I feel like that's one of this is something that I wanted to be a little bit vulnerable about.
Yeah, sure.
In talking about myself, is that I feel like I have a lot of room to grow in that direction.
Yeah. You find it hard to forgive people when...
Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone does. I mean,
Yeah.
You're not alone. Not at all. So many people feel that way.
Even if outwardly I don't make much noise, I've gotten better at that.
Yeah.
At outwardly not being like angry or
holding
mean.
it back a little bit.
Inside there's a fucking tornado going on.
Yeah.
Two voices. One is like you should have put your foot on the ground a little bit harder there, buddy. And the other voice is like, man, look at yourself. You
so
think
mean.
you're on a spiritual path?
Yeah.
Huh? Look at all this anger. Your face is all tight, and you're not beyond this. And
that's really common, actually.
it happened this morning. I was telling you about this guy that I got like mad about, and I shot him like a kind of like, I would say, to be very fair and respectful towards myself. I was not exactly just mean and angry in the email or in the text. Most of it was just a very firm expression.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, I am upset because of this reason. And in a way, that's still better than what I used to do, where earlier I would just yell, and then I read a book called Nonviolent Communication. And now...
And it worked.
Even when... No, it didn't completely work, but it has seeped in a
improved.
little bit
Yeah.
more. Even when there is violence, I try to say, hey, this is what happened, this is how I feel, these are my needs, this is not being respected. So instead of just making an angry chimpanzee sound, it's at least peppered lightly with useful bits of information about what happened. Why did I feel this way? What could be better next time? God damn it!
Yeah.
Yeah, but I still feel like a lot of struggle about this.
But that's great work. I mean, you can't change things just like that. Like about yourself. Like our brains are physical beings. Our minds and our emotions, they like take time to move. Like you think about you're moving in your house. You got to keep going back and out. You got to keep going, getting stuff, bringing it in, go get more stuff, bring it in. You got to put effort into moving things. And then at some point, things have been moved. But you can't just pull up with the car and be like, okay, moving, and then it's done, right? Yeah. You have to work slowly. And then once you get everything inside, then you start unpacking it. It becomes a mess. You start arranging it. But you make progress over time.
Yeah.
And I think that what you've just described is yourself making that progress, right? And that work of getting better at stopping the angry chimpanzee sound and choosing to say something level-headed, soon that becomes second nature. Yeah. And then you get to start working on something else that you like even better than that.
Something that is actually helpful is that it's not a completely thankless job.
Thankless or tactless? Thankless, yes.
As I keep moving in this direction, the gears are not grinding against each other internally.
Yeah.
The internal friction is reducing. I am more at peace with myself.
Yes.
I feel better and more respectful
Amazing.
towards the person that I am.
Yeah.
The pain in my facial area that is like my baseline existence is reducing.
Yeah.
And my overall level of happiness.
Yeah.
And even when there is conflict, if I feel like there was actually a conflict with this kind of girl that I was sort of with until a couple of days before I came to the conference.
Oh, wow, that's raw.
But we were kind of in like a weird twilight zone.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to get into the details of it because it's not very relevant, but we had like a sort of fallout with each other.
Hey, Spence. Nice evening, huh? Yeah, oh, it sure is, my friend.
Yeah. Enjoy it.
See ya.
See ya. So I had a kind of fallout, which from certain perspectives,
Yep.
pretty sure from hers at least, was like a big deal of a fallout. But I notice that I don't have too much lingering.
You feel resolved.
I feel resolved in the sense that I felt like throughout that entire thing, I
Yeah.
did not do anything that I feel bad about. I felt like the ways in which I acted
Yeah.
were completely aligned with what I believe are my principles.
Good.
And
So there's nothing left to do.
yeah, there's nothing
Yeah.
left to do, and I think the right steps to take
Yeah.
for me are the ones that I took. And if the outcome of that is that this relationship is not going to go in this particular direction, then so be it.
That's okay.
And I think if I had to make those compromises in order to go in that direction, my face would start filling up with that tension due to the consequences that would
Yeah.
happen. So I noticed that, wow, I'm being kind of light
Just
and
easier
free
to
and
move
liberated in ways that I did not expect in the past.
Yeah.
And it's kind of coming out of a process of trying to align myself with my values and being able to sacrifice some of the lower hanging things.
Right. It's easy to get mad, and it
Yeah.
feels good right away, but
Yeah.
long term it honestly doesn't usually feel so good. And
Yeah.
your body starts to learn, like, hey, actually I like this long term reward a little better.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And
What
I
you
think
just
with
described.
time and iteration, the long-term reward hits earlier.
Yeah.
When you're like, oh, hey, hang on, remember this? You're feeling kind of bad about this, but you did this.
You
thing,
start
this is gonna-
expecting
yeah.
it sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's easier to continue on that path because you
Yeah.
know that you will be rewarded for the effort.
Thanks for joining me and May today in the Room of Lives. In the next part of our conversation, we discuss the idea of holding lightly in relationships and even in science.